Hi, Lena. So you have asked me to take a look at your talk proposal, and I am happy to do it. And I understand that the topic of the talk is something that we talked about a bit at in the hall at RubyConf India, which is the patterns for migrating databases in production to a new database schema. And so my background is I already know that you know what you're talking about. I know that you have a great talk in this. You've got the material for a great talk here, and so my goal here is just to make sure that you have an abstract which will communicate to conference committees that the fantastic talk that you already have in you. I'll preface this by saying I am terrible at editing. I'm really bad at making little suggestions and asking little questions. I generally just have to kind of get an idea about what the writing is trying to say, and then I kind of write my own version, like how I would say it, and then I kind of just say, any of this that you want to use, go ahead and use it, and the parts that you don't want to use, don't use them. I took some notes earlier. I kind of had an earlier go around with this, and then I reverted it, and now I'm going to go through this again, but maybe informed by those notes. So I really like that you've got the problem statement front and center here. This is something that a lot of people don't, at least when they're getting started writing stuff like this, writing copy like this. I mean, a talk abstract is effectively advertising copy, because you're advertising your talk. You're trying to convince people to go and see your talk. And a lot of times, what I see is failing to lead with the actual problem, the actual pain point that this is addressing. But you've nailed that. You've got the pain point right here. The fact that the database is the slow-moving part of the software development pipeline. It's hard to change, and if stuff goes wrong with the change, the impacts are going to be huge. And I actually, with my first edits here, or my first sort of alternate version, like I said, I'm not very good at making little edits. My first alternate version is aimed at really enunciating that problem statement, and really kind of, the thing that you want to kick off with, I think, in my opinion, is you want to really connect with people. You want to connect with the painful experience that they've had, so that your prescription for healing that pain is going to be eagerly wanted. And one thing I want to address here is I really want to get away from the passive voice, like the database is considered to be. I really want to have a somewhat more active voice here, and a little bit more like you're talking to me in a hallway at a conference and explaining the issues that you've seen and how you fix them. So what if we started out with something like this? We say changing an application's. We want to contextualize things. So changing an application's architecture is hard. Emphasis on the hard. And I think I want to actually add a production applications architecture. I am cribbing a little bit from the notes that I took earlier. So I don't want to suggest here that I am inventing all of this verbiage off the top of my head. Yeah. So now that we've contextualized things, we're talking about changing a production application architecture. Now let's narrow it down to the specific pain point that we're talking about here. One of the scariest changes of all kinds of change is modifying the schema of an app's database while it's in use. Can't spell modifying. There we go. Because if something goes wrong, the impact on both customers and development velocity can be enormous. Again, I'm cribbing from my earlier notes here. If it seems like I know exactly what I want to say, I had to go around over these a few times before I came to words that I liked for my version of this. And I also want to talk about, here about this particular issue with these kinds of database schema changes, which is that, unlike code changes, schema changes can be really, really hard or impossible to back out. And that is the pain that I want to narrow, I want to focus in on, because that's something I think, anybody who needs to be going to your talk, that's the pain that they need to be thinking about here. So I'm going to say it's, and what's worse, it can be hard or even impossible to back out a schema change, database schema change. If things go wrong. Yeah. Okay, so that's I'm gonna line that out just to say that this is my suggested alternative. Here are some of my suggested alternative words for that paragraph. So now we've drawn attention to, we've contextualized the pain, and then we've drawn attention to the specifics of the pain and why it's so awful. And now what we get into here is talking about how there are some patterns for dealing with these kinds of architectural changes on the software side, on the code side, I should say. So there are techniques such as branch by abstraction or strangler pattern to help you do continuous delivery for major application changes. Is there a similar pattern for database changes? I want to just kind of reword this a little bit. Again, this is basically turning this into my proposal, which I realize, but this is just how I would say it, and how you want to say it is maybe an adaptation of or somewhere in between these versions. Or maybe my version isn't useful at all. I don't know. But I'll give it my best shot. There are some patterns that can make updates to it. Okay, so I want to relate to developers' experience with this stuff. I want to say there are some patterns that can make updates to an application's code structure I'm going to emphasize code here. Code structure a little easier, such as the branch by abstraction pattern, just capitalizing these to make them stand out, or I know this is the strangler vine pattern. But what about changing the structure of long-used database tables? Are there any similar patterns for Now, what I don't want to say here, I don't want to repeat words that I've used already. I try to avoid that. So I don't want to say, like, are there any similar patterns to make database changes less scary? Because I've already used scary. So I could use frightening, or I could sort of mix things up a little bit. What I have in my notes is we can use to make, let's say, production database changes less fraught with peril. And that's what I have in my notes, but actually now that I think about it, I kind of want to say less risky here. I like that. All right, so I'm going to line out this above here just to make it clear that this is the old version and this is my suggestion. In the next paragraph, you start to introduce the solution. And that seems like a perfectly good order of things. One thing that I want to change right here is, so these words, recently I came across this pattern. And I mean, truthfully, I think a lot of talks really start from this place. A lot of great talks out there start from the something that somebody recently came across and they explored. But I mean, realistically, I don't think that we want we don't want those words in a talk proposal, because that's not something that a conference committee wants to see, because and you know, it's also not something that a conference goer necessarily wants to see, because they read that and they think, oh, this is somebody who just read a pattern and now it's their hammer and they want to hit everything with it, but they haven't actually used it in production. And I know that you have used this in production, and so that's really what we want to emphasize here. So I really want to change the way this is worded. So I'm going to drop down here and put in my alternative. So remember, we're starting with, are there any similar patterns we can use to production database to make production database changes less risky? As a matter of fact, there are. So you've got two names for this pattern in here, and I think it makes perfect sense to talk about how there's like an alias for this pattern name in the talk itself. I don't think there's any real usefulness to naming them both in the abstract. So I'm just going to stick with expand collapse, and I think that this reads a little better if we type it as expand/collapse pattern. Provides blueprint, again cribbing from my notes, for updating an in-use database schema with safety and reversibility, and that's the big one. And now we don't need to talk about what we don't actually have to talk about what the pattern consists of at all here. I mean, again, this is an abstract. This is a teaser. This is not. You're not supposed to be, giving away the content of the talk here. But I think it's okay to have a couple of sentences, although they can always be removed later. So if I were to say that I would reduce this to just like by expanding the application in parallel. And I'm gonna kind of take the bullet points that you have up here, and I'm gonna get them in line, I think. So these are the two. These are the things that we're able to do while the parallel schemas are both in place, and gain confidence. Gain confidence, that's perfect language. I wouldn't change anything about that. That the migration is safe. And then once we've satisfied ourselves that that's okay, can't type. Again, emphasis, contract, application, only use the new version. All right, so there's my alternative suggestion for this segment here. And I'm basically using the same order of topics that you did. This is not something that I use for every talk abstract review I've done. Sometimes I see a need for a bigger reshuffling of the content. This, I mean, this, you know, the basic flow here is great. All right, and now we're getting into your qualifications to talk about this. And here, I might have less to offer. You know, one of the things I'd love to see here is a little more detail about the application that you've done this on. I mean, it's always nice to have some anchoring numbers, especially if they're big sounding numbers. You know, if you've got like n number of customers or you know, n number of database rows or tables or something like that. Not really necessary, but it can be if you have some exciting sounding numbers for that, it can be cool to kind of put that in as a qualification. But yeah, see, I mean, we want to say something like, one thing I want to say here is that you've successfully applied this. Like you're saying that you've used it, but I want to say that you've successfully applied it. Or you know, even better. So obviously you're the expert here. You're the one who's going to give the talk. You're the creative engine behind this. But sometimes it can read a little better if you can say something like, we, you know, at company, we've successfully applied this pattern to make major changes. I like your use of major, to the core of the application. All while serving customers in production. I'm assuming that's the case. In this session, and now we move on to what you're going to learn. In this session, kind of get into some concrete takeaways here. You'll learn how to apply the expand contract pattern to make large, scary, refactorings. We haven't gotten that word in yet. Ooh, let's say large, scary, but necessary, because that's, I mean, That's a big part of this, right? We don't do this for fun. We do this because we need to do it for our design. Without threatening the, now let's just say like robustness. You know, and I think one thing I kind of want to draw out here is that this session isn't just like, here's the pattern, use it. You know, you have experience applying this pattern. You have more than just done it, but you've learned lessons about the subtleties of it. And so I'm thinking about how I would say that. And maybe what I want to do is kind of split this up and first get across the idea that you have learned subtleties about it. In the process, we've learned some important lessons about I don't want to use apply twice in one paragraph. Implement works. I don't want to repeat this pattern. So now, coming back to this paragraph, talk about the subtleties. You'll learn how to avoid pitfalls. Actually, I should be looking at your outline here because that might give me some ideas. How to avoid pitfalls, and what do we want to say here? Saw the word experience up there, and I like that. How to succeed is without nail biting or costly downtime. How about that? I don't know. I'm not really sure about that line, but you can tweak it. Nail biting what? Nail biting switchovers. And I have less to say about the outline. I mean, your outline is your outline. So that pretty much wraps it. Let me go ahead and line this out again, just to indicate that that's the old and this is my successful new, or my suggested new verbiage. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up, and hopefully this video has explained my reasoning for the different suggestions. And I think I'm going to draw this to a close now.